Yo guys, what is up? Max in our Diablo 4 video, and today we're talking about a theory-crafted build that I'm very excited to play in Season 2. Now, obviously, this is a theory-crafted build, so I haven't gotten to play and test all of the things myself, but with the changes to the damage formula, DoT builds are going to be really strong. They're buffing Conjuration stuff, and I think it's going to be like kind of a season of the DoT builds. And there's one build that takes advantage of all of the things that they're changing to like conjurations and summons, and also takes advantage to all of the things that are DoT builds. And that is a Hydra Sorcerer. And today I want to walk you through my thought process for a build that I think is going to be really, really powerful in Season 2, a Conjuration Hydra Sorc. I'm going to be going over how I built this class and kind of walk you through the different moving parts of why I think this is going to be so strong. So if you're looking to play a class or try something new in Season 2, you'll get an understanding for why I think this is going to be so awesome. Let's get right into the video. Real quick, before we get into the video, a message from the sponsor, which is me. We've been working really hard on our website, DPS Check. This was the website that we provided all of the build guides for. And I'm excited to share that we have now added an integrated Paragon board that's going to have a search feature. It's going to actively update while you're using it. But the real big feature that I'm excited to show you guys is that for all of our build guides and for build planners, we're going to have a Paragon board stat sheet that's going to be actively updated so that whenever you spec into points, it'll show you your total stats of what you're speccing into, and also the board maximums. So here we can see, for example, on this build, which is a basic skill build, I grabbed 70% basic skill attack speed, which is the maximum available on all of the Paragon boards. I've got 98% core skill damage, which is the maximum amount available on all the boards, and attack speed maximum that's available on all of the boards. This is just going to be another tool to min-max and know if Paragon boards are good or not, maxed amount of damage, and so on and so forth. So should be really helpful once the season starts for build guides. So we're going to start talking about the Vampiric Powers just because they line up so perfectly with this kind of build. To start, we've got Coven's Fangs. This reads, your Conjuration, Companion, Minions, and Bat Familiar attacks deal 52% increased damage to crowd-controlled enemies, and Lucky Hit, your Conjurations, have a 30% chance to inflict Vampiric Curse to enemies. So we've got a big damage multiplier to crowd-controlled enemies, and a chance to inflict Vampiric Curse. Then we've got Prey on the Weak. You deal 16% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. Enemies are vulnerable while affected by a vampiric curse from your other vampiric powers. So now we deal an increased damage to vulnerable enemies, and all of our conjurations have a 30% chance to inflict vulnerable on enemies. One of my big complaints about the sorcerer was basically you had to rely on Frost Nova for vulnerable. Vulnerable is now additive, so it's not needed, and we do not need to use Frost Nova anymore. So we can like specialize Sorc builds a lot more, and it's still going to be good. We've got now just a base 32% increased damage against vulnerable enemies. And to pair with that, we've got Feed the Coven, Conjuration, this ability, a Cursed Touch. Lucky Hit up to a 44% chance to inflict Vampiric Curse on enemies. Enemies with the Vampiric Curse have a 15% chance to spread it to other surrounding enemies. So now we've got our Conjurations can inflict Vampiric Curse, we can inflict a Vampiric Curse, and then we're going to deal more damage to enemies afflicted by the curse. Then we've got Flowing Veins. This is a major power. You deal 60% increased damage over time to enemies that are moving or affected by Vampiric Curse. So now we've just got base 60% increased dot damage at all times on top of a massive damage increase for our Conjurations. And then I've also got here Feed the Coven. Lucky Hit, Conjuration, Companion, Minions, and Bat Familiar attacks have a 60% chance to restore 10 primary resource to you and increase the damage that we deal by 10% for 4 seconds. So now we just basically aren't going to have to worry about resource recovery on Sorc, which can be a bit of an issue because our Conjurations will just at default be restoring resource for us. Now, once again, I can't like test all of these things before the new season launches, but the other option, let's say we don't need a lot of resource gen, would be the Anticipation node. This reads your ultimate skills gain 20% cooldown reduction, and they deal 12% increased damage for each nearby enemy affected by your damage over time effects. This doesn't say that it has a cap, and in a big group of enemies, if we're lighting everything on fire that we cast our ultimate, which we are going to be using Inferno on, is just a ridiculous amount of damage and burn damage for Inferno. So if we don't need the mana, then I'm going to go with this. If we do need it, I would go for the minions can restore our resource. Continuing on with new things, we've got a super important aspect. This is the Battle Casters aspect. Now, this is going to be part of your season journey, meaning you'll be able to pick this up by like level 10 or 15. And it's a new sorcerer specific aspect that reads, lucky hit, when your conjuration skills hit, you have a 30 to 40% chance to gain +1 ranks to your conjuration skills for 12 seconds. This can stack up to 3 times. With the changes to vulnerable and crit damage, getting plus ranks onto your skills is going to be more important than ever. We're going to pick this up very, very early, and basically get up to 8 ranks of our Hydras. Not to mention, we can get ranks on our helmets pretty early, so we get +9 ranks of our Hydras while we're in the leveling process. Plus, we're going to get these Vampiric Powers. So this is going to be a massive buff just for starting off, and obviously this is going to be something that scales very well into the end game. On top of that, they just buffed the aspect of Engulfing Flames. Now we deal, this is I'm thinking of putting this in the amulet slot, which would give us 45% bonus burning damage to enemies who are below 50% of their total life, or up to 150% bonus burning damage if they're affected by more damage over time than their total life. What this means, if an enemy has a lot of DoT on them that they would die, but let's say it would take them like 3 to 4 seconds to die, now they're going to die basically instantly. So enemies are going to be evaporating on our screen, which means the less uptime that we have on enemies, the more survivability that we're going to have, because they're going to have less of an opportunity to deal damage to us. We can also pair that with one of the new unique rings that's lucky hit. Your damage over time effects have up to a 50% chance to erupt, dealing 5 to 6 scaling damage of the same type to nearby enemies. So now we don't need Fireball to do these explosions of fire, because our ring is just going to cause DoT explosions on enemies for us. And obviously, we're going to use the Serpentine aspect. This is going to give us an additional Hydra, and this was also recently buffed, and now it's increased duration of our Hydra up to 24% increased duration, whereas before it was reduced duration of Hydra. So this is just going to be really nice quality of life to pick up on top of all the other things that we're doing for our conjurations. Now, I will talk about these other aspects, but before I do, I kind of need to explain where we're headed with this build, because otherwise they're just not going to make any sense. So on my skill bar, I plan to be using Chain Lightning, Flame Shield, Teleport, Hydra, Inferno, and Firebolt. With the enchantments, Hydra, after spending 200 mana, a 5-headed Hydra spawns for 5 seconds, and Lightning Spear, absorbing crackling energy, has a 10% chance to conjure a Lightning Spear. Now, these might be a little bit weird. We are going for a burn build, so maybe you'd think that I would be using Incinerate. Maybe you'd think I'd be using Firewall. And once again, this is all on paper, but all of this sounds like it's going to work really well together. So we are using the Hydra enchantment. This means that we need to use a core skill or something that we can spam mana with, or spend a resource, because I want these big 5-headed Hydras to spawn, and I want them to spawn often because they're going to be doing a lot of our damage. That means that we need to use a core skill to basically spend this mana, and the core skill that we're going to be using is Chain Lightning. The reason we're going to be using Chain Lightning is because it's got a modifier on it that whenever it critically strikes is at a 30% chance to spawn crackling energy. So we're going to be spamming this into crowns, spawning those crackling energies. When we pick up that crackling energy, we have a chance to conjure lightning spears. So now all of those conjuration things that we were grabbing that are like your conjurations and your like minions can deal more damage, that's also going to apply to our lightning spear. We don't really care that much about the like actual damage of lightning spear. We more care about them being up. The reason we want these lightning spears to be active is because of conjuration mastery. You deal 3% increased damage for each active conjuration. The lightning spears are going to be spawning, our Hydras are going to be active, and with the changes to crit and vulnerable, getting these damage multipliers are going to be more important than ever. And getting the most out of Conjuration Mastery means that we need to use another Conjuration. So we could use Ice Blades and get some of this cooldown applied. I don't think that's as good. So I'm going for Lightning Spear. And then we're also grabbing the node Static Discharge. Critical strikes with our shock skills have a 15% chance to form crackling energy. This means that we're going to be constantly casting and spawning those crackling energies. So not only we have Hydras up, we're also going to have Lightning Spears. And the Lightning Spears will... the way that we're speccing them, they're going to be stunning. Guaranteed stun. Anytime one of these spawns and they hit an enemy, we get a guaranteed stun. Now, with fire, we don't have a lot of sources of immobilize or crowd control, and so getting a stun is really important because we've got Coven's Fang, which is going to give us that 52% increased damage to crowd-controlled enemies. So having a way to reliably stun is going to be really, really awesome. That's a guaranteed stun on those lightning spears. So now for our other aspects, we're not going to use a unique helmet because this is going to be the slot that we can roll plus ranks of Hydra, and the aspect that I'm thinking of putting on here is Binding Embers. This allows us to move unhindered through enemies when Flame Shield is active and gives us a guaranteed immobilize on enemies, which is going to be really nice because, once again, it's a crowd control. We can guaranteed proc that crowd control. Then we're going to deal more damage to those enemies, and then we're going to deal more crit damage to those enemies that are immobilized in our skill tree. We've got Disobedience. This has got a massive buff because armor is going to have less value, but we're still going to want it. By playing Sorc, we're going to have a ton of resistances, but we're still going to want as much armor as we can, and so Disobedience seems like it's still going to be a must-have. Then I've got the aspect of Control to deal 35% more damage to immobilized, stunned, or frozen enemies. Once again, we can now proc those reliably with multiple different ways, so just more damage for us. Ever Living aspect, you take 25% less damage from crowd-controlled or vulnerable enemies. The big thing here is vulnerable are like companions, our conjurations will be making things vulnerable for us, and they're going to be like doing it for us. So now we've just got 25% less damage taken from basically all of the enemies. And then I grabbed a charge aspect. Obviously, any movement aspect that you could put on, you can totally use. I just thought that maybe the collecting crackling energy, getting that 15% move speed, and then basically always having permanent 15% move speed would be really nice. You could use, like, after you teleport, you gain more move speed or something like that, but I do want to be moving as fast as possible. And then I also grabbed the recharging aspect. Every time Chain Lightning bounces, we get mana back. This is going to refund some of the mana so that we can always cast our abilities. There are a lot of other options for things here. I just don't know how much mana we're really going to need. And so making sure that we're always topped off and that we're always going to be able to use our abilities, I'm just prioritizing there. Now we get into the actual skill tree. Now, originally, I wasn't going to use Firebolt, but they just buffed this, and it's looking really good. Firebolt increases the burning damage that we deal to enemies by 25% for 3 seconds. This is a basic attack. We're going to be able to use it at will, and any enemy that is surviving, we basically just hit them with this basic attack, and then we deal 25% more burning damage. And hopefully, if we're under the threshold, we can cast that basic attack, and then get Aspect of Engulfing Flames to now deal 150% bonus damage over time to them, which is just going to be gross. Then we're going down to our core skills. We're grabbing Chain Lightning, and Chain Lightning crit strikes will give us crackling energy. We don't care about the damage of this, so just 1 point there. Then we can go down to Flame Shield. Mana cost, I don't think we need. We've got a lot of things that are going to give us mana back. So we can go Shimmering Flame Shield to get 50% of our health back. We get Teleport for the damage reduction it's going to give us. Elemental Attunement, just 1 point to have a chance to reset our cooldowns. Glass Cannon so that we deal more damage. Then we get to our Hydra. Hydra just got buffed. It did lose its scaling off of enemies that are healthy, so that is a bit of a nerf, but I think it's going to net out more positive than negative. The Summoned Hydra, this isn't updated yet, but it's going to read, Hydra also burns enemies for an additional 60% of its base damage dealt over 6 seconds. So we've got a ton of burn damage coming out of our Hydras. We've got Precision Magic. We've got so many things that are going to require us to lucky hit enemies, so this seems like a must-have. I want to make sure that I'm staying alive on this Sorc, so we've got 3 points into Align the Elements to stack up 40% damage reduction against elites, plus Mana Shield, which is going to be another 21% damage reduction when we cast 100 mana, which we should be doing fairly often. Lightning Spear, once again, we just want this active. I plan on getting a necklace that's going to give me a 6% increased damage for each active conjuration, and we should be able to reliably have like 8 to 10 stacks of this, which is a ridiculous amount of damage. And those Lightning Spears, when they're hit enemies, are going to guarantee stun them, giving us a lot of crowd control plus static discharge, which gives us a chance whenever our lightning skills crit to get more crackling energy for more spawns of those. Inner Flames, more damage with our pyromancy skills to enemies while we are healthy, which should be with all of the damage reduction we're grabbing pretty often. Devouring Blaze, more crit damage against burning enemies, and then if they're immobilized, we get a 30% increase to that. Once again, we have a mobilize on button press with our Flame Shield, which is really nice. Then we've got Inferno. There is a big option here. If you could go Unstable Currents, and then this would allow you to cast a lot more, and then you would be able to stack up that conjuration number higher. because you would get free cast of your conjuration, your shock conjurations. So this could net out better, but on paper, I think we're going to want that extra burn damage and the pull. And then if we're grabbing the thing that's going to allow us ultimate stacking damage for all of the enemies that are burning around us, could actually lead to some genuinely really high damage with Inferno, which could be nice. And then, of course, Fiery Surge. Whenever we kill an enemy, we get increased mana regen, and Endless Pyre. Whenever we're dealing burning damage, we're going to increase the burning damage that we're going to deal. I don't know if we're going to need Warmth or not. Once again, this is a Theorycrafted build, so I think I've got enough things and healing and survivability to not need this, but maybe we would need to shift some points to Warmth. I don't think so. And then lastly, we've got Combustion. Your burning effects deal 20% increased damage and an additional times 2% per unique source of burning you have applied to the enemies. Apparently, this works for your different Hydras, so your different Hydras count as different stacks of this, which would be really gross. So we should be getting a ton of different burning damage. And this, I mean, we're not going to care about our crit damage for Esu's Ferocity, so I think this is going to be the best option. Lastly, for our Paragon board, I haven't like full spec'd out a Paragon board, but I just want to kind of show you what some of the options are going to be available to us, because the Paragon board is now going to be even more important than ever with the changes to the damage formula. So one thing that we've got here is Conjurer. For every 5 intelligence within range, Conjuration skills deal 13.2% increased damage and have a 20% increased duration. That's going to leave our Hydras up more and our Lightning Spears up more so that they have more time to stun enemies, which is going to be really nice. Not sure if I'm going to grab Invocation. This is a brand new glyph. I think we probably will grab it. It's going to read, for every 5 dexterity purchase within range, your Conjuration skills gain 27% increased crit damage, and enemies damaged by your Conjuration skills deal 1% reduced damage to you for 6 seconds, stacking up to 12%. So this is going to be another big survivability tool for actually like the damage that we're dealing from our Hydras. Flame Feeder is going to give us a ton of burn damage and increased damage to burning enemies, and Torch is going to give us a ton of increased burning damage and increased damage stacking up per nearby burning enemy. So those are all going to be really nice. For legendary nodes, this was just buffed. Elemental Summoner, your Conjuration skills have 10% reduced cooldown or mana cost. They also deal bonus damage equal to times 3% of the total amount of your bonus damage with Cold, Fire, and Lightning. We're obviously going to be stacking up a ton of bonus damage with our Fire, but this means that any bonus damages that we get to Lightning are not only going to benefit our lightning spells, but also benefit our Hydras. So there's no actually like wasted damage increases. If you're like gearing up and you're level 55 and you get a lightning roll, that will actually feed into the damage of your fire spells, which is awesome. And lastly, we'll definitely be grabbing Searing Heat. Your fire skills have their critical strike chance increased by 10%. We got a lot of like crit stuff, and their direct damage is increased by an amount equal to 10% of the total amount of your bonus damage with fire, up to a maximum of 30% more damage, which we're going to be stacking and achieving very easily. So more crit chance for our skills and more direct damage that they're going to be dealing. Guys, that is going to do it for the video. Obviously, at the end of the day, this is a Theorycrafted build, but if this interests you, this is going to be a build that I dive into this season with, so I will have updates and guides for this build, for leveling, for endgame, and so on and so forth, because this just all sounds so cool, and there's just so many new synergies to take advantage of with a build like this. So yeah, guys, I will catch y'all on the next one. Let me know if you plan on diving in with a build like this. I'll catch y'all later. Peace!